Spaghetti supper. In the years before the internet and the beeps and bings of social media, writers took things they saw, things that they witnessed in their everyday life, and turned it into wonderful horror. My grandmother wrote a number of stories which she didn't accept awards or money for that were later turned into movies. One of which was called Spaghetti Supper, the same name as this story. Most of the world is too young to remember this one or Happy Birthday to Me. The fact of the matter is that these weren't just stories, but events that happened besides our house so many years ago. All fiction has roots, and the devils grow and grow and grow. My friends, this is your dinner invitation, one to a spaghetti supper. It was very common to receive an invitation or a knock at the door asking if your family would want to come to supper, something that doesn't happen in the new world we have created. Most of us would cringe at the idea, to eat at the guy's house that lives in the house beside us, or the lady that lives in the shoe with 20 kids, but back then it was a very common occurrence. Even the devil can be friendly, something my grandmother used to say. A lady and her family moved into an old house next door to us. The place had sat for years after the church fire, a lovely old Victorian house with blue and pink shutters, which had last time. They appeared to be a normal family, wife, husband, and 2 kids, a boy and girl. During the day we would hear the kids playing in the backyard. The boy would be stacking old sticks from a nearby oak tree, and the girl would sit at a little wooden table, lined with teacups and baby dolls. She would talk about wonderful times and things that I found strange. Each of the baby dolls had men names, and at the end of her little party, she would ask each if they were fond of spaghetti because they were having spaghetti supper tonight. My grandmother disliked my spying, but she listened with open ears. Something made her wander over and become friendly with the lady one morning, in a way only my grandmother could do. Armed with coffee and pie, she conned the woman to sit down and tell her life story. She would never tell me, but I knew I would find out, and she did as well. Her and the local older women would gather at her house once a week and play bridge. I have only seen them old women shuffle a deck of cards once. Most of it was talking about the local bad apples and the illegible men. In my later years, I have told these type of parties were called hen parties, or the gathering of old wise ones, as they would gather to discuss the fate of the locals. It wasn't until years later that grandmother would turn their little club into something of a detective club that operated under the cover of a book club. Their group would go on to solve some of the most bizarre cases in criminal history, and as you would have guessed, grandmother would write about them. This may have been the trigger that helped start it all. The night my grandmother and I had spaghetti supper with the family next door. The night, which gave grandmother the idea to pull the old wise ones together to form the Old Crones Society of Interested Parties. Now I guess we need to dig a little deeper into the dirt of the events of that night. Most families have disagreements. It's not uncommon for a man and a woman to fight like cats and dogs over some of the simplest things. A few weeks after the family next door had settled in, their disagreements began. Nights were filled with screams and the sounds of cups slamming against old walls. Sometimes during the day the kids would wander over into our yard in hopes I would play with them or have tea with the girl. Which I did on more than one summer evening. She was a sweet child, as my grandmother called her, but had a dark secret. You could see it in her eyes, like she was missing someone or calling out to ghosts from her past, what little past that child had at the time. Not long after, the mother came over and sat down with grandmother and explained that her husband was seeing another woman here in town. This wasn't the father of the kids, but a 5th husband, as each had done similar things in the past, and it wasn't something she could deal with. She invited grandmother and me over for supper, a spaghetti supper. She was in a habit of fixing her mother's old recipe when bad things happened to her family. I liked spaghetti, grandmother liked it and was always after a new recipe to add to her collection, and at times she reminded me of the devil after a soul. She once pulled her old Ford in front of a woman who won first place at the county fair for pulled pork and refused to let her pass until she gave her the recipe. It was the Game of Thrones County Fair edition, but her Sherlock Holmes brain detected something dark in the woman's voice and we were about to find out what. Anytime we were called to go eat at another's home, she would always make me dress my best, cleaning lint off of me saying you got to look special because you are. Part of me wished I found a way not to go to dinner that night, but the other part of me says then you wouldn't be able to tell this story. So, I guess one evil pays for another. We arrived promptly. Grandmother always likes to show up early to see if she can help. As we stepped into the old house, the wonderful smells of garlic bread, sun-dried tomatoes tickled our noses. This was a moment when you become instantly hungry. The wife welcomed us in and showed us to a large table where the other kids were already sitting around. I secretly thought to myself, if there were a few more of us this would look like a scene from The Lord of the Flies. The girl was well dressed as she always was. The boy, however, reminded me of the monkey boy they found living with wolves some time ago. There was something off about him. Grandmother sat beside me for a moment, until the wife came back in with drinks. Grandmother asked, "Will your husband be dining with us tonight?" Unsure what she would say, she responded, "Lord no, George dines alone in there." She pointed to a half-cracked door where all I could see was a man in a hat sitting quietly in front of another large table. Grandmother hopped up, saying, "I guess this old woman can help." The women frowned but didn't refuse. I don't know if grandmother caught this, but I did. This was the second time that night I had a strange feeling about dinner. My eyes and ears paid more time to the ongoings in the kitchen than I did at the table. Hearing the two women talk and laugh was the high point of the night. At times I would peek in to see grandmother stirring noodles and the wife of the man in the other room grinding up meat in a hand grinder. She told grandmother this was the special ingredient to this wonderful spaghetti. She would then take the cured meat and toss them in a large cast iron cooker and let them sizzle. Whatever this wonderful meat was, I hoped grandmother would learn, as it smelled of freshly cooked bacon and fried chicken. For moments, as the smell filled my nasal cavities, I dreamed of what it would taste like. I hardly do this and haven't since my grandmother's apple pie. The women asked the grandmother if she would watch the food, as she needed to run off to the bathroom. When she did, she spotted me peeking around the door and said, "Be a good boy and go check on the woman's husband and see if he needs anything, a glass of water or whatever." This was her attempt at being sociable to a person she knew wasn't. Maybe she thought my whining personality would lure the old man out of his den, or maybe she just wanted to send a spy to do her nose work. In any case, I did as I was told, reluctantly I might add. The children at the table didn't say a word as they watched me walk toward the man's secret place. I eased the door open and said hello, but he didn't respond, moves or otherwise acknowledged my presences. The room was lined with dark brown oak-stained shelves filled with old books. A pipe and bag of tobacco rested undisturbed beside the man's hand. Yes, this was a place where one could get away from everything, I thought to myself. A place where one could read and do the things they would do without affecting others. Still seated in my mind, I long for a place like this of my own. I tapped the man on the arm saying, "Mister, can I get you anything?" He didn't move. As I moved toward the front of him, I noticed strings of thick blood dripping down his face from underneath of his black fedora hat. I found myself reaching out toward the unblinking man to lift his hat off of his head. This is when I let out a howl and a commanding scream. My grandmother ran in to see me holding the hat that belonged to the man and to see the whole back part of his head was missing, including the brain. The little girl ran in saying, "I guess you know where mother gets the meat for the spaghetti, from bad husbands." I haven't had spaghetti since.